The foreclosure papers were already signed when Preston Ashworth IV demanded $80,000 for the wedding. My name is Vincent Romano, and what this entitled trust fund kid didn't know was that I owned the bank holding his family's $2.8 million mortgage. You see, Preston thought he was dealing with some small-time community bank employee. What he got instead was 48 hours later, staring at eviction notices for the family estate that had been in his bloodline for 4 generations. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who look ordinary. I stayed completely silent during his classist rant about blue-collar families understanding their social position. I nodded politely when he threatened to postpone my son's wedding indefinitely unless we coughed up what he considered pocket change. And then I made a decision that would destroy his entire world. By the way, if this story sounds familiar, maybe you've dealt with entitled rich kids who think daddy's money makes them better than everyone else. I'd love to know where you're watching from, especially if you've ever been underestimated because of your working class background. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. It all started 9 months ago when my son Anthony brought home his fiancé for the first time. Now, I've been around long enough to read people pretty quick. Spent 4 years in the Navy, another 15 as a mechanic, and the last 29 years building Romano Maritime Financial from a single storefront into 65 branches across New England. You learn to spot trouble coming from a mile away. Anthony had been dating Preston for 9 months when he finally worked up the courage to bring him to our house in Federal Hill. I could see the disappointment flash across Preston's face the moment he stepped out of his spotless BMW and took in our neighborhood. Row houses, small yards, working families. The kind of place where people actually know their neighbors' names and look out for each other. I was wearing my usual Saturday outfit, jeans and an Old Navy t-shirt that had seen better days. My 2012 Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles sat in the driveway next to his car that probably cost more than most people make in a year. You know what I mean? Sometimes you can tell everything you need to know about a person just by watching how they react to your truck. So, you're Anthony's father, Preston said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. His designer watch caught the sunlight, probably worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. Anthony tells me you work in banking? I noticed the pause, the careful way he said it, like he was already calculating my worth based on what he saw. I work at a bank, yes. Anthony jumped in quickly, bless his heart. Dad's being modest. He's been with the same company for 29 years. Really worked his way up. What my son didn't know was that I owned that company. But more on that later. Preston's smile was the kind wealthy people give to service workers, polite but distant. The kind that says, I acknowledge your existence, but we're not equals. He glanced around our modest living room, taking in the worn but comfortable furniture, the family photos on the mantel, the framed picture of Anthony's Boston University graduation that I was so proud of. Boston University, he said, examining the diploma like it was evidence in a court case. Impressive. Must have been quite an investment for your family. The way he said investment made it crystal clear. He thought we'd scraped and struggled to afford it. He had no idea I'd paid Anthony's full tuition, 4 years, $180,000, without touching a penny of my real assets. But I wasn't about to correct his assumptions. Sometimes it's better to let people show you who they really are. Anthony worked very hard, I said simply. Of course. Merit scholarships help so much, don't they? Anthony's face went red. He'd never told Preston about any scholarships because there weren't any. He thought his old man had taken out loans, made sacrifices, maybe even worked overtime at the community bank to afford his education. He didn't know that Boston University's yearly tuition was less than what Romano Maritime Financial generated in about 5 hours. But I wanted it that way. See, I raised Anthony to understand the value of hard work, not the comfort of daddy's checkbook. When his mother died of cancer 6 years ago, I promised her I'd raise our boy to be self-sufficient, to earn respect through his actions, not his inheritance. That promise was sacred to me. Dad, Anthony said quietly, trying to change the subject. Preston's family is hosting an engagement party next month at their yacht club. The Martha's Vineyard Country Club, Preston added with obvious pride. Been in my family for 4 generations. He was marking territory, establishing hierarchy. Old money versus whatever he thought we were. The kind of guy who measured his worth by what his great-great-grandfather accomplished instead of what he'd built himself. That sounds wonderful, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It will be, Preston replied. Though, I have to be honest, Mr. Romano, Anthony and I have been discussing the wedding plans, and we have some concerns about the venue situation. And there it was. I could feel it coming like storm clouds on the horizon. Anthony showed me the reception hall you suggested, Preston continued, and I could hear the disdain creeping into his voice. Russo's on Federal Hill. He pronounced it like it left a bad taste in his mouth. Now, let me tell you about Russo's. Sal Russo had been serving the best Italian food in Providence for 30 years. His place had hosted everything from christenings to golden anniversaries. Good, honest people celebrating life's important moments. But, to Preston, it might as well have been a McDonald's. I'm sure it's adequate for certain celebrations, he went on, but our guest list includes partners from my law firm, family friends, business associates, people who expect a certain standard. Anthony looked like he wanted to crawl under the couch. This was his future husband talking about his family's suggestion, like it was some kind of embarrassment. I felt my blood pressure starting to rise, but I kept my mouth shut. Sometimes you learn more by listening than talking. Preston, we talked about this, Anthony said quietly. I know, sweetheart, and I want to make this work, but we need to be realistic about what kind of wedding represents both our families appropriately. Both our families. Right there, that told me everything. He meant his family. Ours was just the sideshow, expected to smile and write checks and stay grateful for being included. You know what really got to me? I'd seen this before. In the Navy, there were guys who thought their daddy's rank meant they deserved respect they hadn't earned. In the garage, there were customers who looked down on you while you fixed their fancy cars they couldn't even change the oil in. And now, 29 years after starting my own business, here was some punk treating my son like he should be thankful for the privilege of marrying into proper society. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something was starting to simmer. See, I'd spent nearly 3 decades building Romano Maritime Financial from nothing. Started with a $15,000 loan and an absolute determination to prove that an Italian kid from Federal Hill could compete with anybody. Worked 80-hour weeks, missed family dinners, sacrificed everything to build something real. And I'd done it quietly, without fanfare, because I believe you let your actions speak, not your bank account. Anthony thought I was just another bank employee because that's what I wanted him to think. I raised him to earn his own way, to understand the value of hard work. When Maria, that's my sister and the VP of operations, when she suggested putting Anthony through school on the company dime, I said no. He was going to succeed because of his brain and his work ethic, not because Daddy owned the bank. But watching this entitled little prince dismiss my son's happiness for the sake of impressing his country club friends, that was testing every ounce of patience I'd learned in 58 years of life. What did you have in mind? I asked, keeping my voice level. Preston's whole face lit up like Christmas morning. There's a beautiful venue in Martha's Vineyard, Oceanside Manor. It's where people like us typically... He caught himself before finishing that sentence, but we all heard what he meant, where the ceremony would be more appropriate for our combined social circles. People like us, not people like me. He had no idea what people like me were capable of when pushed too far. It sounds lovely, I said. What kind of investment are we talking about? Well, that's the thing, Preston said, and I could see him shifting into what he probably thought was his most reasonable diplomatic mode. For the guest list we're planning, about 150 people. We're looking at around $180,000 total. Anthony went pale. I watched him do the mental math, probably thinking about his father's imaginary community bank salary, wondering how we'd possibly manage that kind of expense. That's quite a bit, I said, which is why I've been thinking about how to make this work for everyone. Preston was really warming up now, probably thinking he had us right where he wanted us. My family has connections at the venue. We could potentially negotiate the cost down to, say, $80,000 from your side. $80,000. Like he was doing us some huge favor. The thing is, he continued, and here came the hook. This really needs to be decided soon. Oceanside Manor books up years in advance. If we don't secure the date this week, we'll lose it forever. An ultimatum wrapped up in artificial urgency. Classic manipulation tactic. Create pressure, limit options, Force a decision before people have time to think it through. Anthony was staring at his hands, probably running through every possible way his family could scrape together that kind of money. He didn't know that $80,000 was what Romano Maritime Financial generated in roughly 2.5 hours on a typical business day. "Dad, you don't have to," Anthony started. "Actually, I do," Preston interrupted, and his mask slipped just enough for me to see what was really underneath. "Anthony, sweetheart, you know how important this is to both our families. My parents have already started planning. They've invited the senator, the mayor, partners from 3 different law firms. This isn't just a wedding, it's a networking event that will benefit both of us for years to come. Both of us again. Sure, kid, both of you." "And if we can't make it work?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. Preston's smile faltered for just a second, and I saw a glimpse of what was really behind all that polished charm. "Well, then we'd have to seriously reconsider our timeline. Maybe postpone until we can find something more financially feasible." The threat couldn't have been clearer if he'd written it in neon lights. Pay up or no wedding. My son's happiness held hostage by some trust fund baby who'd never worked an honest day in his life. Anthony's eyes were starting to well up. "Preston, you're putting my father in an impossible position." "I'm being realistic about our situation," Preston replied, and the condescension in his voice made my hands clench into fists. "Anthony, your father works at a community bank. He's probably making, $65,000 a year? Asking him to contribute $80,000 to a wedding is already generous, considering the proportional investment. $65,000 a year. If this kid only knew." I watched my son's face crumble. Here he was, caught between the man he thought he loved and the father he believed couldn't afford to give him the wedding of his dreams. What Anthony didn't understand was that $80,000 represented about 2.5 hours of Romano Maritime Financial's dailies, operations. I could write that check without even checking my account balance. But this wasn't about the money, never was. This was about respect. This was about some entitled brat thinking he could extort my family because we didn't fit his definition of proper society. This was about my son being made to feel ashamed of where he came from. Let me tell you something about where we came from. My grandfather Antonio Romano stepped off a boat from Sicily in 1952 with $47 in his pocket and not a word of English. He spent 40 years laying brick, building the houses that people like the Ashworths lived in, while looking down on people like us. My father, Sal, worked 3 jobs: mechanic by day, security guard at night, weekend construction work, just to keep food on the table and send me to decent schools. When I joined the Navy at 18, it wasn't because I was patriotic, though I learned to be. It was because it was my ticket out, my chance to learn skills and see the world beyond Federal Hill. 4 years on a destroyer taught me discipline, leadership, and how to size people up fast. When I came back, I worked as a mechanic for 15 years, saving every penny, watching how the banking guys in their fancy suits treated working people like numbers on a spreadsheet. That's when I decided to get into the game myself. Started with a tiny storefront offering car loans to people the big banks wouldn't touch, charged fair rates, treated customers with respect, and built relationships instead of just processing transactions. Word spread, business grew. 29 years later, Romano Maritime Financial had 65 branches and $800 million in assets. But here's the thing, I never forgot where I came from. Never started looking down on people who worked with their hands or lived in modest neighborhoods. Success didn't make me better than anybody else. It just gave me more responsibility to help people like my family used to be. And now this privileged little punk was trying to shake down my family like we were some kind of charity case. "I need some time to think about this," I said, standing up slowly. My knees creaked a little, occupational hazard of crawling under cars for 15 years. But my voice stayed steady. "Of course," Preston said quickly, probably thinking he had me on the ropes. "But, like I mentioned, we really need an answer by Friday. Oceanside Manor won't hold the date much longer. 3 days." He was giving me 3 days to come up with money he assumed I didn't have. What he didn't know was that I'd already made my decision the moment he threatened my son's happiness. After I left their apartment, I sat in my Ford F-150 for a long time, engine off, just thinking. The truck's odometer showed 180,000 miles, probably more than Preston's BMW would ever see. But it was paid for, reliable, and it got me where I needed to go without making a statement about who I was trying to impress. That truck represented everything Preston didn't understand about people like us. We didn't need fancy things to feel good about ourselves. We found satisfaction in doing honest work, taking care of our families, and earning respect through our actions rather than our bank accounts. But Anthony was miserable. I could see it in his eyes, the way his shoulders hunched when Preston talked about realistic expectations. My son was choosing between his family's supposed financial limitations and his future happiness, all because some spoiled brat was too embarrassed to have a wedding that didn't impress his country club friends. You know what really burned me up? This kid had never struggled for anything in his life, never laid awake at night wondering how to make rent, never worked double shifts to afford Christmas presents, never watched his wife fight cancer while worrying about medical bills. He lived in a world where money was just something that appeared in his account every month, courtesy of great-great-grandpa's investments. Well, it was time for Preston Ashworth IV to learn something about the real world, and I was about to become his teacher. That night, I sat in my home office staring at the quarterly report spread across my desk. Numbers don't lie. They never have, never will. That's one thing you learn in banking. People can put on whatever face they want, drive whatever car makes them feel important, live in whatever neighborhood feeds their ego. But the numbers? The numbers tell you who somebody really is. Preston didn't understand that I'd spent 29 years learning to read people through their financial patterns. Entitlement, arrogance, the assumption that money equals worth. It all shows up in how people handle their accounts. And I'd also learned that information is the most powerful weapon in any business relationship. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Maria's direct line. My sister had been with Romano Maritime almost from the beginning, working her way up from teller to VP of operations. She understood the business as well as I did, maybe better in some ways. Vincent? It's past 10. What's wrong? I need you to run a comprehensive financial background check, full compliance review. On who? The Ashworth family, Martha's Vineyard. Start with Reginald Ashworth III and work your way down to Preston Ashworth IV. There was a pause. Maria knew me well enough to hear the steel in my voice. This wouldn't have anything to do with Anthony's fiancé, would it? It might. What did the little bastard do? I had to smile at that. Maria never minced words when it came to protecting family. He thinks he can shake us down for $80,000. Thinks we're some kind of charity case that should be grateful for his attention. And he doesn't know who his future father-in-law is. Not yet. But he's about to get an education. I'll have the report on your desk by morning. You want the works, property records, business investments, trust funds, mortgages, everything. And Maria, pay special attention to any accounts or loans they might have with us. Already on it, sweet dreams, big brother. By Thursday morning, I had a complete picture of the Ashworth family's financial situation spread out in front of me like a chessboard, and let me tell you, it was fascinating reading. Preston's trust fund, $450,000, managed through Romano Maritime's private banking division. Typical rich kid setup, monthly allowance with restrictions on major withdrawals. The kind of account that let him live like he was wealthy while keeping him dependent on the family money. Reginald III's business ventures, a mixed bag of old money investments and some questionable recent decisions. Real estate holdings in Martha's Vineyard, Boston, and Newport. Partnership in a yacht club. Board positions at 3 different companies that looked more impressive on paper than in actual performance. But the real treasure was what I found buried in our mortgage division files. The Ashworth family estate, that beautiful 7-bedroom colonial in Martha's Vineyard where Preston had grown up, where his parents entertained senators and mayors and other people who thought their social connections made them untouchable. It was mortgaged through Romano Maritime Financial for $2.8 million. I leaned back in my chair and stared at that number. 6 years ago, when the housing market was hot and everyone thought property values would keep climbing forever, the Ashworths had refinanced their family home, took out a hefty mortgage to fund some business investments that, according to our records, hadn't worked out quite as planned. But here's the beautiful part. Romano Maritime wasn't just any bank. We specialized in working with family businesses, community organizations, people who valued relationships over transactions, and every single one of our mortgage contracts included what we called character clauses. See, when you're dealing with family money, with generational wealth, character matters. A bank isn't just lending money. It's investing in the kind of people who represent your institution's values. So, our legal team had crafted language that gave Romano Maritime the right to accelerate loans if borrowers engaged in behavior that violated community standards. Discrimination based on economic status. Check. Harassment of potential family members based on perceived social standing. Check. Public statements suggesting that certain ethnic or economic groups know their place. Double check. I pulled out my reading glasses and went through the Ashworth mortgage contract line by line. The character clauses were crystal clear. Any behavior that Romano Maritime's board of directors deemed inconsistent with community values and mutual respect could trigger immediate loan acceleration. Preston had just given me legal grounds to call in his family's entire mortgage. But I wanted to be thorough. I called our compliance department and requested a formal review. Not unusual for a bank president to ask for documentation when potential violations came to light. By Thursday afternoon, I had signed affidavits from 3 Romano Maritime employees who'd witnessed discriminatory behavior from Preston at various community events over the past year. Turns out my son's fiancé had a history of making condescending remarks about working-class families and people who don't understand proper society. The compliance team had been documenting incidents for months, waiting for enough evidence to take action. Well, they were about to get their chance. I also discovered something else interesting in Preston's financial records. Those monthly trust fund withdrawals, they were going toward maintaining a lifestyle that was completely unsustainable without family money. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, luxury vacations, all funded by great-great-grandpa's investments, while Preston played at being a successful lawyer. The kid was spending $12,000 a month just to maintain his image. Take away that trust fund, and Preston Ashworth of 4 would discover real quick what financially feasible actually meant. Friday morning came, and I was ready. I had the Ashworth financial profile memorized, the character clause violations documented, and Romano Maritime's legal team on standby. All I needed now was for Preston to call and seal his own fate. Friday afternoon came exactly as I expected. At 5 p.m. sharp, my office phone rang. Preston Ashworth of 4, punctual as a Swiss watch when it came to collecting what he thought was owed to him. I was sitting in my corner office on the top floor of Romano Maritime Financial Headquarters, looking out over Providence Harbor. 29 years ago, I'd started this company in a 400-square-foot storefront 3 miles from here. Now, I had the best view in the city and enough power to change people's lives with a phone call. Preston had no idea he was about to experience both sides of that equation. "Mr. Romano, I hope you've had time to consider our conversation." "I have," I said, settling back in my leather chair. The chair Preston thought belonged to someone else entirely. Great. "So, what's the decision on the venue contribution?" His voice had that confident edge of someone who thought he held all the cards. Amazing how wrong a person could be. "Preston, I have a question for you first." "Of course. You mentioned that this wedding represents both our families. I'm curious what you think my family brings to this partnership." There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning as he tried to figure out where I was going with this. "Well, Anthony, obviously. He's wonderful, smart, talented. Beyond Anthony, what do you think the Romano family contributes?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not sure I understand the question. You know what? I was starting to enjoy this. 29 years of dealing with entitled rich kids who thought their daddy's money made them untouchable. And finally, I had one exactly where I wanted him. You've made it clear that your family has connections, social standing, financial resources. What do you think we offer in return?" I could hear him scrambling for a diplomatic answer. Every family has their own unique strengths. Unique strengths such as, "Mr. Romano, I'm not sure where this is going. I'm trying to understand why you think $80,000 is a reasonable request from a family you clearly consider financially inferior." The silence stretched out like a taut wire. When he finally spoke, his voice had developed an edge. "I never said you were financially inferior. You said I probably make $65,000 a year. That was an estimate based on average bank employee salaries. Which bank? What? Which bank did you research for those salary estimates? It was a general. You assumed, Preston. You saw my truck, my clothes, my neighborhood, and you made assumptions about what kind of man your fiancé's father is. His breathing had changed. I could hear him getting defensive, probably realizing this conversation wasn't going the way he'd planned. Mr. Romano, if you're upset about the financial arrangement, we can discuss alternatives, such as, well, if $80,000 is too much, perhaps we could look at a smaller venue, something more suited to everyone's budget, Translation, cheaper, more appropriate for people like us. Or, I said, we could look at this from a different angle. What do you mean? Tell me about your family's finances, Preston. Excuse me? You've analyzed mine. $65,000 a year, you said. Community bank employee, limited resources, turnabout seems fair. That's completely inappropriate. Is it? You're asking me to contribute $80,000 to an event that benefits your social standing. Shouldn't I know whether your family can actually afford their portion? His voice rose. My family has been in Martha's Vineyard for 4 generations. That's not what I asked. We own property, mortgage property, dead silence. Preston? What are you implying? I kept my voice level, professional, the same tone I used in board meetings when discussing foreclosures on families who'd fallen behind on their payments. Except, this time, it was personal. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions about financial capacity, the same way you've been assessing mine. This is ridiculous. My family's financial situation is none of your business. But mine is yours? That's different. You're being asked to contribute and your family isn't contributing? Of course we are, but how much? 80,000? 100,000? More? I could hear him breathing hard now. This wasn't going according to his script. Mr. Romano, I don't appreciate this line of questioning, and I don't appreciate being treated like a charity case by someone who doesn't know the first thing about my actual situation. Your actual situation? You drive a 12-year-old truck and live in Federal Hill. And what does that tell you about my priorities? It tells me you don't have money to waste on expensive vehicles and fancy neighborhoods. Or, I said quietly, it tells you that I don't need expensive vehicles and fancy neighborhoods to feel good about myself. Another long silence. I was giving him rope, and he was about to hang himself with it. Look, Preston said, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was reasonable and conciliatory. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. The truth is, Anthony is marrying into a family with certain expectations, social obligations. If your family can't meet those expectations financially, that's understandable. But we need to be realistic about what that means for the wedding, and, frankly, for Anthony's future social position. There it was. The real message he'd been dancing around for months. Anthony was marrying up, and our family needed to pay admission to the upper class or accept a lower status permanently. And with those words, Preston Ashworth IV had just violated every character clause in his family's mortgage contract. So, if I can't pay the $80,000, then what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We'll have to make adjustments. Find something more appropriate for the combined financial reality. And Anthony's happiness? Anthony will adjust. He's smart enough to understand that marriage involves compromise. Anthony will adjust. Like my son, should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity Preston was willing to throw his way. That was the moment I knew this conversation was over. I see, I said. Preston, let me ask you one more question. What? Do you love my son? Of course I do. Enough to marry him if his family had no money at all? The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. In that silence, I heard the truth Preston couldn't bring himself to say out loud. Anthony was an accessory to him, a nice-looking, well-educated accessory that came with the inconvenience of a working-class family. Mr. Romano, that's a hypothetical. No, Preston, it's the only question that matters. I hung up and stared at the Ashworth mortgage file on my desk. $2.8 million, character clauses clearly defined. Legal grounds well established. Time for Preston Ashworth IV to learn what financial reality actually looked like. But first, I needed to have a conversation with my son. Anthony deserved to understand what was about to happen, even if he didn't know the whole truth about his father's business yet. That Saturday, Anthony called and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch at a small cafe near Harvard Square. He sounded exhausted, and when I saw him, he looked like he hadn't slept much. Dark circles under his eyes that reminded me of his mother during her hardest days fighting cancer. Dad, about the wedding thing with Preston. Anthony, you don't need to explain anything to me, but I do. He stirred his coffee without drinking it, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. He's not usually like this. The pressure from his family is intense. They have these expectations about status and appearances that I'm still learning to navigate, like he was the one who needed to change to fit into their world. What kind of expectations? Well, for example, his mother asked me last week what my father does for work. When I said banking, she asked which firm. When I said community banking, she got this look. Anthony trailed off, staring into his coffee cup like it held answers. What kind of look? Like she was disappointed but trying not to show it. You know that polite smile rich people give you when they're being condescending? I knew it well. I'd been getting that smile for 29 years from people who had no idea what I'd built. And Preston's father keeps making these comments about self-made people and how much he respects families who've worked their way up. But the way he says it, it sounds like he's patting us on the head for trying so hard. How does that make you feel? Anthony was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if I belong in that world at all. Last month, Preston took me to a dinner party at his parents' house. Everyone was talking about their vacation homes and their children's private schools and their charity galas. When someone asked what I did, I said I was working as a software engineer. This woman, I think she was a judge's wife, said, "How wonderful that you're getting a trade. That must be such a priority for families like yours." Families like yours. The condescension was unmistakable. What did you say? Nothing. I just smiled and changed the subject. But later, Preston said I'd handled it well, like I'd passed some kind of test. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Compliance completed the Ashworth review. Character violations documented. Emergency board meeting scheduled for Monday. You want me to prepare the foreclosure paperwork? I typed back quickly. Yes, and prepare the trust fund freeze documentation as well. Anthony noticed me checking my phone. Sorry, Dad. Work emergency? Something like that. I put the phone away and looked at my son. Really looked at him. He was thin, stressed, and trying so hard to fit into a world that would never fully accept him, no matter how much money his family paid, or how perfectly he behaved. Anthony, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at students walking by on the sidewalk. Kids his age who looked carefree in a way he hadn't looked for months. I love Preston, I do. But sometimes I feel like I'm auditioning for a role in his life, instead of just living my life. What would happen if you stopped auditioning? What do you mean? What if you just showed up as yourself? As Anthony Romano from Federal Hill, whose father works at a bank and drives an old Ford. What if you stopped trying to translate yourself into something they'd find acceptable? He looked down at his hands. I don't know if Preston would still want to marry me. The honesty in that statement broke my heart and solidified my resolve. My son was ready to spend his life apologizing for who he was, changing himself to earn love from people who should have been grateful he even looked in their direction. Right then, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Romano Maritime Legal Department. I should take this, I said to Anthony. Give me 1 second, I answered. This is Vincent. Mr. Romano, this is David from Legal. We've completed the documentation you requested. The Ashworth mortgage contains clear character violation clauses. We have grounds for immediate acceleration. Do you want us to proceed? I looked at Anthony, still staring at his coffee, still wondering if he was good enough for people who didn't deserve him. Schedule it for first thing Monday morning. Full legal review. Should we notify the account holders? Not yet. I'll handle notifications personally. The wheels were in motion. The yacht club invitation arrived on elegant cream cardstock, the kind of paper that probably cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. The Ashworth family cordially invites you to celebrate the engagement of Preston Ashworth IV and Anthony Romano. Cocktails and dinner at the Martha's Vineyard Country Club. Saturday, April 20th, 7:30 in the evening. Jacket required. Anthony called me Tuesday morning, excited but nervous. Dad, Preston's parents want to meet you properly. His mother said it's important for the families to get acquainted before we start serious wedding planning. Before we start serious planning, translation, before they decided whether we were acceptable enough to join their social circle. I'll be there, I said. Great. And Dad, maybe wear your Navy suit, the one from my Boston University graduation. Even my own son was worried about appearances. That told me everything I needed to know about the pressure he'd been under. Saturday evening, I drove my Ford F-150 to Martha's Vineyard, taking the ferry like I had dozens of times over the years for business meetings. Except this time, I drove past Preston's family estate on my way to the yacht club, the beautiful colonial that was mortgaged through Romano Maritime Financial for $2.8 million. In 48 hours, that would become very relevant information. I pulled into the yacht club's valet area. The attendant looked at my truck like it was contaminated, but took the keys with professional courtesy. You could tell he'd been trained to be polite to everyone, even the obvious charity cases. Inside, the club was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, brass fixtures everywhere, oil paintings of stern-looking men who'd probably never worked an honest day in their lives. The kind of place where membership was inherited, not earned, and where they probably had a special application process to keep out undesirable elements. I found Anthony and Preston at the bar, surrounded by about a dozen people. Preston wore a navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Anthony looked handsome in his dark suit, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like he was trying to take up less space. "Dad!" Anthony waved me over, relief obvious in his voice. "Everyone, this is my father, Vincent Romano." The introductions began like a receiving line at a funeral. Preston's father, Reginald Ashworth III, was a thin man with silver hair and the kind of firm handshake that was designed to measure your worth in pounds per square inch. Preston's mother, Catherine, looked at my department store suit with the barely concealed disdain of someone who'd never shopped anywhere that didn't require an appointment. "Mr. Romano," Reginald said, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they're being gracious to the help. "Preston tells me you work in banking." "That's right." "Which institution?" "Here we go. Romano Maritime Financial." Reginald's eyebrows raised slightly. "I'm not familiar with it. Local credit union, something like that?" Before I could answer, Catherine Ashworth joined the conversation. "How lovely that you could take time off for this. Banking hours must be so restrictive for employees." One of Preston's law school friends, a pudgy guy with a Harvard class ring he kept flashing like a badge, jumped into the conversation. "Wait, Romano Maritime? Is that the place with the branch next to Nunzio's Pizza on Federal Hill?" Several people chuckled at that. "Banking services in ethnic neighborhoods," another friend added with a smirk. "Must be interesting clientele." I felt my jaw tighten, but Anthony's face was burning red with embarrassment. This was his future family, making jokes about where his father worked. "Dad's been with the same company for 29 years, Anthony said defensively. "Really worked his way up from nothing." "Loyalty is admirable," Reginald interrupted, "though I imagine the advancement opportunities in community banking are somewhat limited." Preston put his arm around Anthony in what was probably meant to be a supportive gesture. "Mr. Romano's done well for himself. Anthony managed to get through Boston University after all. Managed to get through Boston University. Like it was some kind of miracle that someone from our background could achieve basic academic success." "Yes," Catherine added, with that special smile wealthy people reserve for discussing the poor. Anthony mentioned scholarships were involved. Anthony opened his mouth to correct this lie, but I caught his eye and shook my head slightly. Let them think whatever they wanted to think. They were about to learn the truth soon enough. "Education is important in our family," I said simply. "Of course," Reginald said. "Preston's told us about your resourcefulness regarding the wedding venue situation. $80,000 is quite a stretch for a family in your position. We appreciate the sacrifice." The sacrifice. Like I was selling plasma to afford their son's wedding. "Actually," Preston said, raising his voice so the whole group could hear, "we're still working out some logistics. The venue we want requires a significant investment from both families." One of Catherine's friends, an older woman whose diamond necklace could have fed a family for a year, leaned in conspiratorially. "Oceanside Manor is divine, but so expensive. Maybe you should consider something more accessible. I know a lovely place in Cranston that does wonderful ethnic weddings." Ethnic weddings. There it was. "The thing is," Preston continued, and I could see him warming to his audience, Anthony's family is dealing with some financial constraints. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. He was publicly humiliating us, making our supposed poverty part of the evening's entertainment for his friends. That's when I pulled out my phone and sent the text that would change everything. Maria, yacht club now. Bring the Ashworth files, foreclosure paperwork, and 2 board members. It's time. Perhaps, Catherine suggested with the kind of smile that could cut glass. You could have a lovely ceremony at Anthony's family church and just do cocktails afterward, so much more intimate than these elaborate affairs. Anthony looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. This was his future family, discussing his wedding like it was a charity case they were graciously managing. You know, Reginald said, swirling his scotch, I remember when the Morettis married their daughter to that Portuguese fisherman. They had a beautiful ceremony at St. Mary's, reception in the church hall. Paper plates, but lovely flowers. Sometimes simple is best. Paper plates. They were actually suggesting paper plates for my son's wedding reception. Preston laughed, clearly enjoying himself. Well, we're not quite at the paper plate stage yet, though Mr. Romano might need to get creative with the financing. The group chuckled like this was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. My son's financial situation had become dinner party entertainment for these people. But then Preston said the words that sealed his fate forever. You have to understand, blue-collar families need to learn their proper place in refined society. The conversation had gotten quiet enough that his words carried across the room. Several other yacht club members turned to listen, probably expecting more amusing stories about the poor relatives. I looked around the group, all these people so certain of their superiority, so comfortable in their assumptions about who belonged where and who was worthy of respect. They had no idea they were about to witness the most expensive lesson in humility any of them would ever see. That's when I saw Maria entering the club's main dining room, followed by 2 men in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios. She spotted me immediately and headed over, with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been doing serious business for 3 decades. The blood drained from Reginald's face the moment he saw the legal documents. Mr. Romano, Maria said as she approached our group, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd closed billion-dollar deals. The emergency board meeting is complete. We have your authorization for the Ashworth account action. Preston looked confused. Ashworth account? What's she talking about? Maria looked around the group with professional politeness, the same expression she used when foreclosing on properties whose owners had violated their loan terms. Mr. Reginald Ashworth, I'm Maria Romano, Vice President of Operations at Romano Maritime Financial. We've been handling your family's mortgage for the past 6 years. Catherine's wineglass started trembling in her hand. There must be some mistake. No mistake, said one of the men with Maria. He was James Patterson, chairman of Romano Maritime's board of directors and someone whose name appeared on the financial pages of the Boston Globe at least once a month. I'm James Patterson, chairman of Romano Maritime's board of directors. Mr. Romano, we've approved the action you requested. The Ashworth account shows clear character clause violations. Preston's face went from confused to pale to completely white in about 5 seconds. Wait, I don't understand. Mr. Romano, you said you work at Romano Maritime. I don't work at Romano Maritime, I said, my voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over our corner of the room. I own Romano Maritime. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that yacht club. Other members stopped their conversations and turned to watch what was clearly becoming the evening's main entertainment. Anthony stared at me like I just announced I was from another planet. Dad, what? Romano Maritime Financial Group, Maria continued, opening her portfolio with the practiced efficiency of someone who delivered this kind of news many times before. 65 branches across New England, $800 million in assets. Your father founded it 29 years ago with a $15,000 loan and built it into one of the region's most respected privately held banking institutions. She handed me a document, the Ashworth Estate Mortgage, $2.8 million, originated in 2018. Current status. In violation of character clauses due to discriminatory behavior documented this evening. Preston made a sound like someone had punched him in the stomach. Character clauses, said the board chairman, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, are standard provisions in all Romano-Maritime mortgage contracts. Borrowers agree to maintain community standards consistent with the bank's values. Discrimination based on economic status, ethnic background, or statement suggesting certain families should know their proper place constitute grounds for immediate loan acceleration. Reginald finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. This is ridiculous. You can't call a mortgage because of a social conversation. Actually, Maria said, her tone remaining professionally neutral, Mr. Romano has full discretionary authority over all lending decisions. And given tonight's documented statements regarding ethnic neighborhoods, families like yours, paper plates for ethnic weddings, and the direct quote about blue-collar families needing to learn their proper place in society, the bank considers this a clear violation of community standards. The older woman with the diamond necklace, the one who'd suggested ethnic weddings, looked like she was about to faint. Furthermore, Maria continued, clearly enjoying this part, our investigation revealed that Preston Ashworth's trust fund, currently valued at approximately $450,000, is also managed through Romano Maritime's private banking division. Preston made that choking sound again, louder this time. Which brings us to the compliance issue, said Patterson. Trust fund management requires character verification. Mr. Ashworth's behavior raises serious questions about his fitness to manage inherited assets responsibly. Anthony was staring at me with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been pride beginning to dawn in his eyes. Dad, is this real? Are you really? Anthony, I said gently, looking at my son who'd spent months apologizing for his family's supposed limitations. Your Boston University tuition was 4 years, $180,000, paid in full, no loans. The reason I drive an old Ford isn't because I can't afford a new truck. It's because I don't need a new truck to know who I am. Catherine Ashworth finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You've been lying to us this entire time. I looked at her with the same expression I'd learned to use in 30 years of business dealings, with people who confused wealth with worth. Mrs. Ashworth, I haven't lied about anything. You assumed I was poor because I dress simply and drive an old truck. You assumed I was powerless because I live in Federal Hill. You assumed I was beneath you because my family came from Italy, instead of inheriting wealth from ancestors who never had to work for anything. I gestured around the room at all these people who'd spent the evening treating my family like an amusing charity case. But why didn't you tell us? Preston asked desperately, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Because I wanted to see who you really were. I wanted to know if you loved my son enough to respect his family, regardless of what you thought our social status was. I looked directly at Preston, then at each member of his family, making sure they understood exactly what had just happened. Instead, I watched you spend 9 months treating us like charity cases. I heard you laugh about ethnic neighborhoods and suggest paper plates for Anthony's wedding. I listened to you demand $80,000 from a family you considered financially inferior. And tonight, I heard you tell everyone that, blue-collar, families need to learn their proper place in refined society. The silence in the room was deafening. Other yacht club members had stopped pretending not to watch. The Ashworth family's public humiliation was now the evening's main entertainment for their entire social circle. Reginald tried to regain some composure, straightening his tie like that would somehow restore his dignity. Mr. Romano, if there's been a misunderstanding— No misunderstanding, I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been making life-changing decisions for 3 decades. You showed me exactly who you are, all of you, and now I'm showing you who I am. Maria handed me another document, this one sealed with Romano Maritime's official stamp. Loan acceleration notice, 48-hour demand for full payment, $2.8 million, due Monday at 5 p.m. Legal grounds, character clause violations, as documented by bank officers present this evening. You can't do this, Catherine said, panic finally breaking through her polished exterior. We don't have that kind of liquid capital. Mrs. Ashworth, said Patterson, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been through hundreds of foreclosures, your family signed the mortgage agreement. Character clauses are clearly defined. Your son's behavior tonight, demanding money from families he considers inferior, making disparaging comments about ethnic communities, treating potential in-laws with contempt based on perceived economic status, and stating that blue-collar families need to know their place, violates multiple provisions. Preston turned to Anthony desperately. "Anthony, you can't let him do this. We're getting married. We love each other." "Do we?" Anthony asked quietly, and I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in months. Strength. "Because 5 minutes ago, you were entertaining your friends by talking about how my family couldn't afford to give me a proper wedding. You told them blue-collar families need to understand their proper place." For the first time in 9 months, I saw my son's backbone. The Romano steel that I'd always known was there, the same strength that had gotten him through Boston University and into a good job. The strength his mother would have been proud to see. "Anthony," Preston pleaded, "your father is overreacting. This is all a misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," Anthony said, his voice getting stronger with each word, "was thinking that I needed to apologize for my family to be worthy of yours." He turned to me, and I saw something I hadn't seen since his mother died. Pride in who he was instead of shame about where he came from. "Dad, how long have you been planning this?" "Since the moment he told me that blue-collar families needed to understand their proper place in society." Anthony nodded slowly, processing everything. "And the $80,000 he demanded? Romano Maritime makes that in about 2.5 hours on a typical business day." He looked around. The room had all these people who'd spent the evening treating his family like an amusing sideshow, then back at Preston, who was standing there with his mouth open like a fish. "Preston," Anthony said quietly, and his voice carried across the sudden silence, "we're done." Preston's face went through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green. "Anthony, you can't be serious. This is our engagement party." "No," Anthony said, his voice steady and clear. "This is my education." He pulled the engagement ring off his finger, a 2-carat diamond that probably cost less than Romano Maritime made in an hour, and set it on the nearest table with a soft click that seemed to echo through the room. The sound of that ring hitting the table was like a gunshot in the silence. Preston stared at it like he couldn't believe what had just happened. "Furthermore," Maria continued, apparently not finished with the evening's revelations, "our investigation into the trust fund revealed some interesting spending patterns. $12,000 per month in lifestyle expenses, all funded by inherited assets, while Mr. Ashworth maintained employment that wouldn't support such expenditures." She handed Preston a document. "Trust fund freeze, effective immediately, pending character review and compliance audit." Preston's phone slipped from his hands and clattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp in the absolute silence. "How long?" Reginald asked, his voice hollow. "How long do we have?" 48 hours to produce $2.8 million in certified funds, Maria said. "After that, the property enters immediate foreclosure proceedings." "That's impossible," Catherine whispered. "We don't have that kind of liquid capital." "Perhaps," I suggested, looking around at all the people who'd been so entertained by our family's supposed financial limitations, "you could ask your friends here for a loan. I'm sure they'd be happy to help, given how much they've enjoyed discussing our family's situation tonight." The looks that passed between the yacht club members made it clear that no help would be forthcoming. These people were vultures, not friends. They'd enjoyed watching the Ashworths mock a working-class family, but they had no interest in actually helping when the tables turned. Preston made one last desperate attempt, dropping to his knees right there on the yacht club's marble floor. "Mr. Romano, this is about Anthony and me. Don't let your hurt feelings destroy our future." "My hurt feelings?" I looked at him with genuine curiosity, like he was some kind of fascinating specimen. "Preston, this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about character. You spent 9 months showing me yours. Now, I'm showing you mine." Anthony stepped closer to me, and for the first time in months, I saw him stand up straight instead of hunching his shoulders like he was trying to take up less space. "Dad, what happens to their house?" "Standard foreclosure process," Maria explained, her voice carrying the professional tone she used when explaining complex financial matters to clients. "Public auction. Proceeds go to satisfy the outstanding loan balance. If it sells for more than they owe, they keep the difference. If it sells for less, they remain liable for the shortfall." Reginald's face crumpled like a paper bag. That house has been in my family for 4 generations. And my family has been in America for 2 generations, I replied. The difference is we built something instead of just inheriting it. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Catherine Ashworth's voice behind us, shrill with panic. Reginald, call someone. Call the bank president. Call someone who can fix this. I turned back briefly, just long enough to make eye contact with her. Mrs. Ashworth, I am the bank president. The last thing I saw was Preston on his knees, frantically trying to gather the pieces of his shattered phone from the marble floor, while his parents stood there realizing that their world had just collapsed around them. 3 weeks later, I was reading the Providence Journal with my morning coffee when I saw the small article buried on page 6 of the business section. Historic Martha's Vineyard. Estate sells at auction. The Ashworth family home had sold for $2.3 million to a tech entrepreneur from Boston who planned to turn it into a summer residence for his growing family. After legal fees, auction costs, and outstanding loan balance, the Ashworths walked away with almost nothing. Preston's law firm had let him go the Monday after our yacht club encounter. Apparently, conduct incompatible with the firm's values regarding community relations was grounds for immediate termination. Word travels fast in legal circles, especially when it involves discriminatory behavior toward potential clients. Anthony knocked on my door that same morning, looking better than he had in months. The stress lines around his eyes were gone, and he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen since before he'd started dating Preston. Dad, we need to talk. We sat in my kitchen, the same modest kitchen in the modest house that had apparently fooled an entire family of supposed sophisticates for 9 months. Why didn't you tell me, he asked, about Romano Maritime, about the money, about everything? I poured him coffee and thought about my answer. Do you remember when you were applying to colleges and I told you that you'd have to earn your way through scholarships and hard work? Yes, and I did. I worked my ass off. He stopped, realizing what he'd just said. Wait. Did I? You worked exactly as hard as I said you'd have to. You earned every grade, every achievement, every opportunity. The only difference is that I paid the bills instead of making you take out loans. But why lie about it? Because I wanted you to become Anthony Romano, not Anthony Romano's son. I wanted you to know that you could succeed based on your own merit, not because Daddy wrote checks. Anthony was quiet for a moment, processing this. And Preston? Preston was a test you didn't know you were taking. I needed to see if he loved you enough to respect you, regardless of what he thought your family's status was. He failed spectacularly. He did. But more importantly, you passed. You stood up for yourself when it mattered. You chose family loyalty over social climbing. That took courage. Anthony's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and shook his head. 20th call from Preston this morning. He keeps saying he's sorry, that he understands now that his behavior was wrong, that he wants another chance. How do you feel about that? Like I dodged a bullet. Anthony looked around our kitchen, really seeing it for the first time in years. This house isn't a step down from the Ashworth estate, is it? It's a choice you made. Every choice I've made for 29 years has been about building something real instead of just displaying wealth. Your mother and I decided that family mattered more than status symbols. Anthony smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since he'd brought Preston home. Mom would have loved watching you take down those snobs, wouldn't she? Your mother would have done it herself, probably with more style, and definitely with better one-liners. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, father and son, no longer separated by secrets or shame about who we were. 6 months later, Anthony got promoted to senior software engineer at his company. He moved into a better apartment in Cambridge, started dating a teacher from Somerville who thought his Federal Hill family was authentic and wonderful. And most importantly, he stopped apologizing for who he was. As for me, I kept driving my Ford F-150, kept living in my modest house, and kept running Romano Maritime Financial the same way I always had, with respect for working families and zero tolerance for people who confused wealth with worth. The Romano Financial Scholarship Fund I established in Anthony's name has helped 47 first-generation college students so far. Every time I hand out one of those scholarships, I think about Preston Ashworth and his friends laughing about ethnic neighborhoods and families like ours. Because here's what they never understood. In America, respect isn't something you inherit. You earn it. And if you're watching this story, maybe you've been underestimated because of your background, your neighborhood, or what you drive. Trust me, the people who underestimate working families like ours always live to regret it.